is that life is constantly emerging, history is constantly unfolding, and our choice is how do we navigate and how do we cope and how do we move.
You know, all of the work that we did as spiritual people was to learn to not turn the other cheek, but to be in the moment, to observe, to go towards the quiet. But I'm not seeing that any of those responses are perhaps powerful enough to deal with this new enemy or this new confrontation.
I mean, in many, many ways, what's happening in the world and what seems to be happening is pretty daunting in terms of its potential impact. I think a series of questions emerge for me, which one is how do we manage our own moods in the face of all these intractable problems and some of these negative circumstances that seem to be surrounding us. In recent years, I've begun to reflect that my own take on transformation was that it was kind of like the big solution to everything, and that transformation was the answer. I've recently begun to appreciate that that may not be the case. Transformation is just simply one of the choices that we have in how we relate to the world, and I think that it's much more important for us to own that and to be responsible for the world that we're in. Rather than seeing transformation in other spiritual disciplines as a kind of escape or movement or way of dealing with and coping with. In my own view, the world is what it is, and I don't like it any more than anyone else, but at the same time, I'm beginning to appreciate how much of history and how much of our way of life in every area is a function of historical contingencies. Nobody planned 9/11, and yet 9/11 has completely transformed our entire civilization in many, many ways. I don't know how big of a difference the Gore Bush issue around the Supreme Court and the Chads and all of that sort of stuff, but if it had gone the other way, what would history look like today? Now, again, without any blame one way or the other, I think what it's revealing is that life is constantly emerging, history is constantly unfolding, and our choice is how do we navigate and how do we cope and how do we move in a world that's moving. Now, I think that the most recent variable in the theme that I'm working on in the current book I'm working on is the idea of accelerating change and how fast things are moving. So things are happening in a few years now that used to take decades. And in that sense, we need to appreciate that we're not biologically or emotionally or psychologically wired to keep up with everything. If we add to the idea of accelerating change the experience of sort of overwhelming complexity that many of us are experiencing, or if we look at the fact that most of our predictions are no longer reliable. I know of very few people that trust their predictions more than a few months or a year. If that is true, then we're living in a state of permanent uncertainty. And finally, if you take the notion of control, which has always been the key to everybody's idea of survival and success, is that you need to have control. Well, it's pretty obvious that we don't have anywhere close to the control we'd like to have if we ever had. And so you take accelerating change, complexity, loss of control, and unpredictability, and you have the major characteristics of the world we're living in. Now, I'm calling that, in my own thinking, a real-time world, that we're living in a real-time world that's happening as we speak. And that's a paradigm shift that's perhaps larger than any we've experienced in human history. And in maybe a couple of generations, we're going to be living in a totally different world. And the world that we know now is going to be completely gone, or at least it'll be unrecognizable. Now you take all of that together and you say, now where is transformation in all of this? And I think that the idea of transformation is really coming down to how are we going to relate to everything? How are we going to relate to ourselves? How are we going to relate to each other? how are we going to relate to our circumstances, and even how are we going to relate to time. So if you
I don't want to let you off the hook, though. I understand where you're going, but there is a big question in my heart, and we got to get to it.
All right.
That one of the great things that we sort of embraced in not only the transformation movement, but even in looking at Martin Luther King and even looking at Gandhi, was the idea of the ripple effect, that an individual or a small conscious group of beings could affect change by having the right amount of spiritual energy and the right amount of critical mass. Even Buckminster Fuller talked about that we could make a shift occur that would be powerful. So I'm asking in this conversation, and you may not have the answer. I understand that it is our response to change, but is it possible, the transformation movement, but even in looking at, we could generate a response by finding that special point in ourselves that causes change? Should we be dropping things in the lake that as transformed beings or people working on transformation that could affect change? Should we be opening ourselves to that kind of action?
Well, it's a huge question, Phyllis. I don't know that I have a simple answer or even an answer. I do think the following, though. I still believe, like you, that individuals can make a difference. I believe that only the individual can make a commitment to anything. And when an individual, whether it's a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King, really stand for their principles or stand for an ideal or stand for a possibility, that's the beginning of a conversation and the beginning of a movement that can perhaps result in a difference in history. So I don't think that, I think all of that's true. By the same token, I think that many people in the name of transformation get trapped in a kind of grandiosity, like we're going to save the world, or we're going to, we tend to ignore the facticity and the realistic dimensions of life in the name of possibility or vision or what have you. So I think that you have to reconcile the paradox between the individual's vision and commitment and the reality of history and the coordination of time. So, for example, there's no question that Martin Luther and Gandhi and Buckminster Fuller and many, many other visionary leaders and inventors and innovators have altered our circumstantial reality. It's not clear how many of those have altered the essence of who we are as human beings. Certainly Jesus and Buddha and some of those people have had that kind of impact on who we are as human beings. But I don't know that, I think there's a distinction there between changing ourselves and transforming ourselves and our relationship to life versus actually having an impact in the historical facticity of circumstance. In the day's world, in my judgment, at the level of material facts and circumstances, we're in serious trouble, and I'm not sure that I'm very optimistic that that's going to turn around. I'm kind of resigned in many ways to some of these problems. But where my optimism still is sparking is in the area of choice, and the fact that while the world may be circumstantially a mess, we have a choice in how we relate to that mess. And if we can take responsibility for that mess and really work on ourselves, much as you were talking about, I think that at least we open up a possibility for something new to occur. I don't think that we're ever going to be able to fix it. I think the more we try to fix it, the worse it's getting. So from a transformational discipline point of view, I think we need to be careful that we're not using transformation and spiritual disciplines as a kind of dead-end alternative to the difficult circumstances and challenges we have, because all that's doing is just simply flipping from the material to the spiritual, like an either or, and I don't think that's going to work. I think we really are engaged in having to invent a third strategy that includes both the material and the physical and the spiritual, and that we need to go beyond the spiritual. And if that's what we mean by transformation, then good for us. But if transformation is just another strategy for coping, I don't think it's going to make much difference.
I think this will open up many more questions. I'm going to just pause right here with you on this one. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what your view is of real time and to see where you come in your thinking about accelerated change. I think you're taking us on an interesting road. I'm going to still stand in that place that I think there is hope for this difficult time we're in, but I'm looking forward to more from you on this. You can add more.
Yeah, I don't want to leave you with the idea that I'm pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. My belief is that when paradigms collide, the one that wins will be the one that can include the other. And hopefully love and humanity will be able to include some of the more mechanistic aspects of the world that we've grown up in. But you know, I'm not hope. I'm trying to become more and more grounded, and I've got a lot more humility and a lot more appreciation for the enormity of what we're dealing with. And I don't want to trivialize the challenge by saying we can simply transform it in a weekend seminar or some variation of that. I think we really need to pause and step back and realize, oh my God, what have we done? And at the same time, acknowledge the miracles that we've created as well as some of the disasters that we've permeated. And together, one way or the other, hopefully we can begin to build a world in which our differences can contribute rather than have to be reconciled and resolved. It's through our differences and our diversity where I locate my hope, because whatever the solution is, it's way bigger than anything I can think. So it's really about some kind of collective participation to invent and create a different world, because I think this one is not going to be repaired in the near, at least in this lifetime.
Thank you, Jim. Talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.